Some dare call it conspiracy.
Welcome to the Some Dare Call It Conspiracy podcast, hosted by Brent Lee and Neil Sanders. After nearly 20 years exploring the world of conspiracy culture, we are taking our guests and listeners on a guided tour of the rabbit hole. Our mission? To discover where the truth lies.
John Bon Jovi. New Jersey's finest. John Bon Jovi reportedly told a teen magazine that he would sell his soul for rock and roll. He also, in an interview with the pop magazine Smash Hits, said that I would kill my mother for rock and roll, and would also, he repeated the idea that he would sell his soul. And again, if Bon Jovi did sell their soul, like, that was a pretty poor deal, because let's face it, Bon Jovi is shit. So,
Amen.
Yeah. Eazy-E of NWA fame. He has also been included by a lot of conspiracy theorists as somebody who sold his soul and then ultimately was taken because he died young of HIV-related illness. Allegedly, or may have been murdered by Suge Knight. Who could say? But I think we're safe on that one. I don't think Suge Knight's going to come out of prison and have a go at us for that. Anyway, there's an interview where he basically uses the phrase "sold my soul," but anybody that's sort of familiar with the group has pointed out that he's not describing a pact with the devil. He's describing
the White Devil.
The White Devil, Jerry Heller, and he's specifically explaining how they got ripped off, and it fundamentally led to Eazy being given quite a lot of money, and the rest of NWA not getting much money at all, but Jerry Heller getting a huge amount of money, and essentially ripping them off and causing the breakup of NWA. But I have mixed feelings about that, because obviously that's the shifty, shady music industry, but off the back of it we got fucked with Dre Day. So swings and roundabouts, isn't it?
No regrets.
Katy Perry is one that's basically a lot of people, she's very hot because she's a prominent pop star, and because she's seen as an influencer to the children and such like that. She's in that sort of lens of the conspiracy theorists, and she's been quoted as saying she sold her soul to the devil when her initial attempts at music career failed. And this has been interpreted by some people as being, an outright confession. She basically said in this interview, "I swear I wanted to be like Amy Grant of music, but it didn't work, so I sold my soul to the devil." And in another interview, she repeats the phrase essentially, I wanted to go a different route, but unfortunately I had to sell my soul to the devil. And what this is about, actually, is Amy Grant is a religious singer. She may even do gospel, or she does Christian music, essentially. And like Britney Spears and so many others, she actually started in Christian music. This is a way for people to get on stage in front of a lot of people, and this is how they got recognized. The sort of talent got sort of picked up, but they didn't see a career in Christian music. And so this is what Katy Perry is talking about. She figuratively sold her soul to the devil because she decided to do pop music, which wasn't her original choice and wasn't something that she was particularly interested in, but it was a way to get exposure and to get to get a career. Snoop Doggy Dogg, he's also one that is accused of selling his soul for a number of reasons. One, in his autobiography,
I can see this one coming.
In his autobiography, he uses the phrase he made a deal with the devil in exchange for fame and fortune, but it's most likely that he's speaking figuratively. And then the other is because he rapped about selling his soul, in the song, which also became a short film, Murder Was the Case. And in this, basically, yeah, it's a Faustian pact. He gets shot and he's dying, and he sells his soul to the devil, only to be essentially tricked and sent to prison. And I think he saves himself at the end by praying to God in the actual song, doesn't he? So again, if people have actually listened to the song, it's like, this isn't saying it's a good idea, right? It's not saying you should definitely do this. This is the way to get ahead in life. It's not that in the slightest. And there's also another problem with accusing the song Murder Is the Case of being a confessional to selling his soul to the devil. And it's very straightforward. Do you know what it is, Brent?
Well, knowing Snoop Dogg or Dr. Dre, it's probably not written by them.
The concept certainly wasn't, and a lot of the lyrics weren't. It was written by DOC, and DOC,
wicked, amazing.
Yeah, DOC was an artist on death row, very, very talented. Got into a car crash and smashed up his vocal cords, and so he's often on skits. He's the person that's really, really sort of like husky voice, and it wasn't suitable for recording songs anymore. So he became like a creative artist, essentially what we call today a ghostwriter. But so yeah, the entire concept came from him, and a lot of the lyrics as well. So it's not an indication. I mean, people, that's an interesting one. So like, nobody, again, this shows what lack of research the conspiracy lot do, because you could make a stronger case that DOC,
yeah,
because of what happened to him, you got the fame and the fortune, but there's a twist to it, DOC. But don't
he lost
get
his voice
and the adulation as well. Like, do you know what I mean? Like, he has to see essentially his stuff making him rich and making other people rich, but nobody really knows that it's him unless you sort of well up on the law, so to speak. So, yeah,
that's a good deal.
It's not bad, actually. Yeah, he's got out of it quite. Yeah, if that is the deal, like DOC did all right out of it, actually. So, you know, like, yeah, shrewd move on the part of the DOC. Lyrics often are used as sort of indications, like Eminem has said in a lot of his lyrics, "I sold my soul to the devil, I'll never get it back." And Kanye West famously did a freestyle where he said, "I sold my soul for fame. It was a crappy deal. At least it came with a few toys like a Happy Meal." And then after that, he got addicted to nitrous and pornography and all sorts of weird stuff. So, you know, Kanye, and sorry, what?
And Nazis.
Yeah. Actually, again, like Kanye West would be at least there's a stronger argument there. Like, but the main one that people talk about though is Bob Dylan, and I remember this being like at the time thinking this was incredible and like almost like insane that such a confession had been caught on tape. Now, Bob Dylan, basically, his artwork incorporates the eye of Horus. I used to have a Bob Dylan t-shirt from seeing him live, I can't wear this because at the time, you know, this has got an eye of Horus on it, so it's Illuminati confirmed. On the other hand, you know, I'm going to go and watch Bob Dylan because he's fucking Bob Dylan. Like, you know, like, don't be silly. And it was great. But there's this interview that he did in 2004 for 60 Minutes with Ed Bradley. And Bradley asked Dylan, "Why are you continuing touring after so many years? Why do you keep doing it?" And Dylan says, "Well, it goes back to that destiny thing. I made a bargain with it a long time ago. I'm holding up my end." And Bradley says, "What was the bargain?" And Dylan says, "To get where I am now." And Bradley says, "Well, should I ask who you made that bargain with?" And Dylan says, "Well, with, you know, the chief commander on this earth and the world that we can't see." And that has been interpreted by literally everybody in the conspiracy world as a sort of solid gold confession to being to having sold his soul to the devil. And even going back and looking at it, it's like, yeah, he doesn't say that at all. Like there's two ways of looking at it that I could see. Immediately, what it made to me is like, it's destiny. I made a bargain, sort of thing. I really wanted this. This was my life. I put everything into this, and now I've reached a level of success. Two things: one, I don't want to stop, because what else am I going to do? And two, why would I stop? This is what I've always wanted to do. Do you know what I mean? And so it's almost like he feels like, this is my purpose. This is what I do. I'm Bob fucking Dylan. Like, I have to explain this shit to you, right? Do you know what I mean? So of course I'm thankful that I've got this opportunity to keep doing it. And to like my friend, like, there's a punk band that he does sound engineering for, like Stiff Little Fingers. They're awesome. And similar sort of thing, like, you know, they've been going for like nearly 50 years. Why? Because he enjoys it, because he loves it, because he's got the opportunity to do it. So why would you waste it? Do you know how many people would kill to be on a stage? It's like, well, fucking me and you, Brent. Like, for a start, we'd love to be
literally
in a band. Well, you know, it depends.
Considering what we're talking about.
Yeah, but on the other hand, Brent, if the devil is listening, right, I'm prepared to kill at least 3 people for like fame and fortune. So, you know, just call me. Anyway, so either that's what Bob Dylan's talking about, or he's talking about God. Because with the chief commander on this earth and the world we can't see, well, that's not Satan. Like, unless you come to it from the beginning point of, oh, he's talking about Satan, that involves giving reverence to Satan, calling Satan the commander in chief. That, but unless you come from that start position, there's nothing in that to suggest that he's saying he sold his soul to the devil, is there?
No,
it's crazy.
No. Like you said, it could be the divine, could be like Archangel Michael.
Yeah.
Like, because he, like, there's that whole guardian angel thing that people are also into, like creatives can kind of get me into, where they channel, who is it? Santana channels Metatron or something like that.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know, but yeah,
interesting
it
that
doesn't
you bring.
say evil.
No, it doesn't, does it? Like, unless you're sort of actively looking for it. Interesting that you bring up guardian angels, because we're just about to go on to something else. But before we do, Brent, you know more about this thing than I do. You're have more of a theological mind and more sort of familiarity with it. Can you sell your soul? What does the Bible say about selling your soul?
Well, I mean, it doesn't necessarily mention anything specifically about selling your soul.
No.
But what it does say is, in Ezekiel, God allegedly says, all souls belong to me. So
interesting.
Considering the concept of the soul in Judeo-Christian and Islamic traditions, the soul was breathed into Adam. So the soul is often referred to as like God's breath. It's the thing that animates us.
Okay.
So essentially, it's him giving us autonomy to live, and then that free will and everything comes into it as well. However, fast forward to Ezekiel, it sounds like God's claiming ownership over all souls, and what it also says is like, all soul, it either says all souls belong to God or all souls belong to me, one of the two. I can't remember if it's God speaking or not. But it also says even that of the Father, even that of the Son, and all souls that sin are dead. So to me, that sounds like all souls belong to God, and if you go against it, your soul doesn't exist anymore. You know, I guess when you die or whatever, your soul will be dead. It's not.
Yeah.
It's just written off. So it doesn't seem like there's any exchange of ownership here, because it's not even your soul to give. Well,
that's what I was just going to say. That sounds to me like what you're saying is you kind of, it's not yours to sell. You can't. So the concept of selling your soul would be pretty tricky, because, you know, it's like it's almost like I've got a bridge to sell you. Isn't it? Like, you know, but so I've got a conspiracy DVD, and I think there's a book attached to it, which is literally called "They Sold Their Souls for Rock and Roll," and it's obviously about this and stuff like that. So, are we saying that technically the title of that should be "They Illegally Sublet Their Souls for Rock and Roll"? It's like, yeah, I mean that seems more reasonable, but anyway, it's interesting that you bring up Guardian Angels and such like that, because again, one of these the bands that sort of started the ideas of satanic influence and the ideas of possession, selling souls, making pacts with people, and general fuckery with the occult is, of course, Led Zeppelin. And this is mostly about the connection between Led Zeppelin and the English occultist and a ceremonial magician, Aleister Crowley. And this is because Jimmy Page was a huge, he was fascinated by the occult, and he was a big fan, shall we say, of Aleister Crowley, wanted to read all his works, was very interested in sort of magic and all of this sort of stuff, to the point where he actually ended up buying a house next to Loch Ness, which is called Boleskine House, and he bought it in the early 1970s because he thought that it would be a great place for musical inspiration, and also it was pretty cool to him that it was connected to Aleister Crowley. But this connection to Aleister Crowley led to rumors about the band, essentially saying that, well, several things. One, that they worship the devil. Two, that they'd made some sort of pact with the devil, potentially for success. And then ultimately that this has led to what has been called the curse of Led Zeppelin, which may have come about through association to Boleskine House and the evil spirits that were conjured up there, or possibly due to a curse put on him by Kenneth Anger, who was an occultist and experimental filmmaker who was friends with Bobby Beausoleil and Anton LaVey of the Church of Satan, and just so happened to have Lucifer tattooed across his chest. So what is Boleskine House, and what on earth was
the word, or like a face?
Yes. No, it says Lucifer spelt out across his chest. It's just tattooed straight across his chest. It's an awful tattoo, looks dreadful, but you know, it seemed to make him happy. So each to their own. So Boleskine House is, as I say, it's a property in Scotland on the banks of Loch Ness, and it was owned by Crowley from 1899 to 1913. Page, again, was known for his fascinations with not only Crowley but the occult, and one of the sort of most sort of obvious expressions of this is that on the vinyl pressing of Led Zeppelin 3, the Crowleyan phrase "Do what thou wilt is the whole of the law," and was actually sort of inscribed on the run out alongside "So mote it be," which is also from Crowleyan writings. So Crowley purchased Boleskine House from the Fraser family in 1899, and at the time it was called the Manor of Boleskine and Abertaraff, and it was named after the local parish, essentially. So the reason that Crowley decided that he wanted this particular house was because the layout was perfect for conducting a series of magical operations known as the sacred magic of the Abramelin, of Abramelin the Mage, taken from the grimoire, the Book of Abramelin. And the purpose of this ritual is to invoke one's guardian angel. And the point of invoking one's guardian angel is that you can ask for certain things. You can ask for occult power, vengeance against somebody, great wealth, knowledge, the ability to be invisible, stuff like that, you know. So there you go. But it's
awesome.
It's not bad, but it requires quite a lot of effort, quite a lot of it's very, very involved, shall we say. There's actually a really good film called A Dark Song. It's an English-made horror film about a woman that hires an occultist to perform the Abramelin ritual in order to invoke her guardian angel in order to... I shan't spoil the film for you, but she wants her guardian angel to do something. I also used to watch these occultists that have spoken about performing this on YouTube. Now, obviously, as I'm saying that out of my mouth, I realize this bloke on YouTube said it was real. Anyway, there are people that would talk about doing this and seeing certain things, and some people take it very seriously. On the other hand, some people take fucking Scientology very seriously, so you can't rely on people. So the Abramelin working, it takes at least 6 months of preparation, 6 months of celibacy, 6 months of abstinence from alcohol, and sort of purity rituals. It also, as part of it, you have to summon the 12 kings and dukes of hell, and you have to bind them, which basically removes their negative influences from your life. And you essentially then sort of like have sort of kind of mastery or control over these entities. And then this brings on your guardian angel, at which point you can ask it a favor. Yeah.
So
Anyway.
you have to capture demons and tame them.
So I don't know if it's exactly that,
to
but
think
it's
that you're worthy of getting good things.
possibly. It's
sounds
nothing
like-
like...
It sounds like a hero's journey.
Does a bit, doesn't it? Actually, yeah. Now that you mention it out loud, like, yeah, it does. It does sound a little bit like that. Also, it's one of these things where, like, 6 months of the types of rituals and like, I believe there's like sort of fasting and periods of extended prayer and ritual and, you know, writing things out, concentration and stuff like that. It's entirely possible that you could just send yourself, for lack of a technical term, a little bit batty, and believe that you've seen these things, potentially. Or it could work. I don't know. I've never tried it, and I probably won't have the time to be bothered to do it. So, hey-ho. But anyway, he decided to start this in 1899, but apparently after about 6 months, he was forced to abandon this. It was supposed to... The minimum it can last is 6 months. So 6 months preparation, then a minimum of 6 months doing it. It can take up to 18 months to do it. Like, and again, one of the main things I seem to remember about Boleskine was there's a room in it that has no windows, so it's a completely contained thing, and this is perfect for a certain part of the ritual, apparently. So this is why he bought the house, and I think he actually altered it to make it perfect for the ritual. But then, yes, sequestered himself in there for 6 months before abandoning it and sodding off to France. And basically, he had to go to Paris to get involved in a sort of a row with this bloke called Samuel MacGregor Mathers, who later Crowley got into a magical battle with, hurling spells at one another like a sort of protracted battle rap, including, and this is, I think this is in, the thing is, a lot of Crowley's writing is, you've got to take it with a massive pinch of salt. At one point, he sends like a young, beautiful woman that turns into an old woman and basically essentially tries to sort of vampirize Aleister Crowley. But he's too strong for it, and he repels it and sends all sorts of psychic drama back at MacGregor Mathers. But, you know, this was later. So anyway, the problem is that as he's buggered off to sort out this internal dispute in the Golden Dawn, essentially who was in charge of it, he'd summoned all these dukes and kings of hell, but he'd failed to properly banish or close the rites when he left. And this is often cited in local law as the reason that the Boleskine house is considered to be not only haunted, but cursed. And ever since then, there's been really strange occurrences that have happened at the place. Crowley later attempted to do the ritual again in 1903, but again abandoned it because he decided that he wanted to go off and marry his wife Rose. And then I think they went to Egypt, and I think it was at that point that she started communicating with Aiwass, who's a the potential alien. But anywho, so despite the quote that Crowley himself generally sort of like said that he condemned black magic. When he was asked about Boleskine House, he said it all sort of got a bit out of hand. But so in his thought, he's not a black magician. He famously defined magic spelled it with a K on the end to distinguish it from stage magic, and he describes it as the science and art of causing change to occur in conformity just with the power of your will. And so he says that the distinction is that white magic is when the will was righteous and aligned with one's true will, and black magic was when the will was perverse, self-serving, and against one's true purpose. So he's talking about, that's Luke Skywalker and Darth Vader, isn't it? That's essentially what he's talking about there.
Basically, yeah, isn't it?
Yeah, another sort of Joseph Campbell type thing going on there, potentially. But we've discussed this ourselves as well. Is like, okay, but what if your true will is not necessarily a good thing? What if your true will is to be a right dick? You could then do that with impunity, couldn't you? And say, well, I'm just following my true path. I'm just being true to oneself and whatnot. So there is wriggle room for being a shit. And even the sort of most ardent sort of like defenders of Crowley cannot deny that at times the man was a shit. So, anyway. Also, basically, in 1934, in a libel case, he said that he never actually practiced black magic and always wrote about it in terms of the strongest condemnation. He described black magic as a totally unscientific and emotional form of magic with terrific recoil upon the practitioner. And so his statement that it got out of hand is basically him saying that. Yeah, it was a bit too much for me, as opposed to sort of a confession of being a black magician. So anyway, when he owned the house between 1899 and 1913, several strange things happened. There was something called the housekeeper's tragedy, where his lodge keeper, Hugh Gillis, suffered a number of personal tragedies, all in a sort of short time period. According to legend, his 10-year-old daughter died suddenly in school, and then the next year, his 15-month-year-old son died of sudden convulsions. There was also a handyman who worked on the estate who had been sober for years, who allegedly got inexplicably drunk and then attempted to kill his wife and his own children. There was also a maid who worked in the house that Crowley himself said had been driven to complete madness by the ghosts and phenomena in the house, and eventually was walled up in an asylum. Also, apparently, there's a story that a local Catholic priest confronted Crowley and warned him about the housekeeper acting strange, suggesting that he too had been overcome by dark forces. So after he sold the house to a gentleman called Major Edward Grant, Edward Grant committed suicide by shooting in Boleskine House, and he just so happened to do it in the room that was Crowley's bedroom, and so that was deemed to be a bit spooky. There was also, after Grant left, before Jimmy Page moved in, allegedly a young couple moved in after Major Grant's suicide. And the wife was blind. And after a month, for no good reason, potentially due to the evil sort of nature of the building, the husband simply upped and left and abandoned her wife in the house, leaving her to wander alone, eventually starving to death. Now, there's no actual proof of this happening or any evidence of a couple moving in ever. So it's probably not true, but it is a good story. So anyway, in 1969, Kenneth Anger had actually found out that Boleskine House was on the market, and he basically tried to rent it for a few months. Jimmy Page then heard about this, and he bought the house outright in 1970. And he was a collector of Crowley memorabilia who had, in his own words, read a lot about Crowley and was fascinated by his ideas. He had a massive collection of occult books, apparently. He was into all sorts of things: demonology, astrology, alchemy, probably crystals and all that shit. And during the 1970s, he actually opened an occult bookstore in London, which he called Equinox. So the problem is that Jimmy Page was basically touring a lot and, you know, being in Led Zeppelin, which takes up quite a lot of the time. And so he actually ended up not living at Boleskine all that often, but he let his friend Malcolm Dent stay there. And Malcolm Dent was actually sort of really skeptical of, like, he didn't believe in ghosts or Satanism or anything like that, which was one of the reasons he was convinced to be able to stay at Boleskine. But he basically said that, yeah, it was crazy. He started hearing things that he couldn't fully explain. One thing that kept happening was he'd be in a room and there'd be a great furore, a big kerfuffle outside, sounds of like things being torn up, like almost like a sort of wind, things being thrown around and banged and just rumblings. And then the second you open the door, all of this would stop. Apparently one evening, this sort of escalated to the point where he woke up in the middle of the night, and not only was there rumblings, but there was like a scratching at his door, and then like a sort of snuffling and sort of growling, like some sort of wild animal was essentially trying to get into the door, which was thankfully locked. And he said he didn't bother to check that night because, and I quote, "Whatever there was pure evil." He didn't bother to check at the night. He sort of stayed awake all night and then waited till the sun came up. And as soon as he opened the door in the morning, there was obviously no sign, like there was no animal that had got in. There was no scratches on the door. It was very unusual. Another friend who stayed at Boleskine House apparently woke up in the night claiming that they'd been attacked by some kind of devil. So sort of, you know, Tucker Carlson levels of sort of interference by demons as you're trying to sleep. There was also, like, you know, your sort of general sort of doors slamming, windows opening and closing, rugs rolling up, chairs moving, cupboard doors opening, like items appearing and disappearing and being found in strange places across the house. And so, yeah, certainly strange. But Led Zeppelin did not do themselves any favors, because as well as openly sort of like claiming that he was interested in the occult and Crowley buying Boleskine House, Page decided that one way to sort of, you know, alleviate any sort of inference that they were strange was to drop their names and take on board symbols, so that some have taken to be sigils, potentially occultic magical sigils. What a sigil is essentially a spell. You write out the spell, you take out certain, I think it's the vowels or whatever, and then you take out any words that any letters that are repeated, and then you mash together all the shapes in order to make a symbol, a much simpler symbol. And apparently, according to certain occult practices, if you do this correctly, this encapsulates the entirety of the spell within it, and that allows you to use it. So in 1971, Page said, after all the crap that we'd had with the critics, I put it to everybody else that it'd be a good idea to put out something totally anonymous. At first, I wanted just one symbol, but then it was decided that since this was our fourth album and there were four of us, we could each choose our own symbol. I designed mine, and everyone else had their own reasons for using the symbols that they used. So the symbols for John Paul Jones and John Bonham were selected from Rudolph Koch's book, The Book of Signs. Jones is a single intersecting circle, said to be to symbolize a person who possesses both confidence and competence, as apparently it's quite a difficult sigil to draw. John Bonham's three interlocking rings is said to represent the triad of mother, father, and child. It also apparently looks a little bit like a drum kit, and apparently it was very, very similar to the logo for Ballantine beer. And John Bonham, who was a bit of a drinker, thought that was funny. Robert Plant's symbol is difficult because he kind of claims it's his own design, though it can also be traced back to a book called The Sacred Symbols of Mu by Colonel James Churchward, which is absolutely nothing to do with the KLF. And it's a feather in a circle. The feather in the circle represents the feather of Maat, M-A'-A-T, the Egyptian goddess of justice and fairness, and is the emblem of a writer. And Plant has explained his symbol, or tried to explain it. And I don't think we should be too harsh about him, because this was a very different time and this didn't have the offensive connotations that it has now. But he's quoted as having said, "The feather is a symbol on which all sorts of philosophies have been based. For instance, it can represent Red Indian tribes." Yeah. Culturally insensitive, but this was the 70s. So anyway, Jimmy Page's symbol is often referred to as Zoso, and that's what it seemingly spells out, Z0S0, and then there's like a line that goes across the O as SO, and it's a pretty cool symbol, to be quite honest. Like, he used to also wear it on a t-shirt. And did you ever have a Zoso t-shirt? I had a Zoso t-shirt in my youth.
No, I wasn't really a big Led Zeppelin fan, to be honest.
Oh, fair enough. But anyway, so where did he get this symbol from? Like, some people basically say Zoso is a demon, the demon that is attached to his soul, or the demon that he sold his soul to. But there's no evidence to this, but it does sound kind of cool. But anyway, it has been used in some pretty obscure occult literature. In 1557, it's used in a book by someone called J. Cardan called Ars Magica Artificia. And this is a book from 1557, and in it, Zoso is a representation of Saturn. It's also, other people have said that it seems to be a sort of a mashing together of the astrological symbols of Saturn, Jupiter, and perhaps Mars, or maybe Mercury. Now, obviously, like, conspiracy theories love this, because Saturn kind of sounds a bit like Satan, and it's got a hexagram on it or something. And so basically Saturn worship is also Satan worship or something. And isn't Baal connected to Saturn, and Saturnalia, obviously? It's a mashing together of sort of made up shit and stuff that appears to be anti-Christian, because it's connected to sort of old Roman traditions, essentially. But in the conspiracy world, Saturn is bad. Like, that's why Nike's considered like bad, isn't it? Because it's supposed to represent the rings of Saturn. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, big if true. But the symbol also appeared in essentially, it's identical. It's in this 19th century dictionary of symbols titled Le Triple Vocabulaire Infernal Manual de Demonomane.
Pardon?
Yeah, you heard me. By a chap called Frinellan, who apparently is actually a pseudonym for Simon Blackwell, who basically is some sort of other occultist. And this book was actually sort of published in 1844, and it's exactly the same symbol. But when he's been asked about what it's about, he said, "My symbol is about invoking and being invocative." He told Classic Rock's Mick Wall in 2001. Mick Wall is mentioned, in case anyone's like, I've heard that name. Mick Wall of Kerrang! He's one of the people that they rail against at the end of Get in the Ring by Guns N' Roses. He's a rock journalist.
Yeah,
absolutely.
I was wondering where I know that name.
And that's it. That's all he's ever said to it, basically. And he said that that's all I'm ever going to say about it. Also, although everybody refers to it as Zoso, apparently that's not how you pronounce it. It's unpronounceable. It doesn't spell out a word. It's a symbol that creates a visual rather than a direct translation. So it's a bit like when Prince became a symbol, so it could be. Maybe that's it. Maybe it was a sort of abandoned plan by Led Zeppelin to try and not pay their record company. Or who knows? Anywho, so Kenneth Anger met Page in the early 1970s, and they were both at an auction where they were both trying to buy the same piece of Crowley memorabilia. At this point, they struck up a friendship, and Page invited him to basically stay at Loch Ness at Boleskine House. And Anger was like, brilliant. I've only recently stopped renting there. Like, this means I don't really need to move my stuff out. I don't know if that really happened. But anyway, Ango's, as well as an occultist, he's an experimental filmmaker. And he was making this film called Lucifer Rising. And he wanted Jimmy Page to record the soundtrack to it. Like, you know, do all these weird music and shit, basically. Now, he'd previously had another young gentleman, very talented musician, who'd been in bands such as Orchestra and the Milky Way, and actually also in the band Love before it was called Love. In fact, the band Love actually took its name from this gentleman's nickname because he was such a miserable sod. Like, so it was a joke. So it was like kind of a joke, basically.
Wow.
Yeah. He's just a young man who was known on the scene as Bummer Bob. Not for the reasons that some of you might be, although there was a degree of that going on, particularly with Kenneth Anger. But anyway, this was a young gentleman called Bobby Beausoleil. And Bobby Beausoleil was latterly known for murdering Gary Hinman. Is connected to the Charles Manson family. And why he murdered Gary Hinman was because basically Gary Hinman had sold him $1,000 worth of mescaline. He'd sold it to the Straight Satan's Motorcycle Club. The Straight Satan's Danny DiCarlo, who was a principal witness in not only the Bobby Beausoleil's trial, but also the trial of Tex Watson and Charles Manson. Danny DiCarlo is the person that basically, along with Paul Watkins, came up with the idea or told the police about Helter Skelter, which was Charles Manson's idea that a race war was inevitably going to start between black people and white people, and the Manson family would go off and hide in a hole in the ground in the desert until their number grew to 144,000, at which point they would come back out, where the entire population would be black people who'd killed all the white people, and they would revere Charles Manson, and he would become king of the world. And the only problem with this is that wasn't anything to do with Charles Manson. It was actually taken verbatim from the writings of a preacher who had a sex cult in Box Canyon called Krishna Ventnor. And essentially, Paul Watkins and Danny DiCarlo took Krishna Ventnor's story, including being crucified and doing Christ rituals, which was something that Manson never did, but that Krishna Ventnor did. And they appropriated that to Charles Manson. Anyway, Danny DiCarlo gave Bobby Beausoleil a gun and said, go and get either the money for those drugs, because they were bad drugs. They nearly killed one of the motorcycle club's wives. They were shit, and we threw them away, and so we want our money back. And if you don't get the money back, I want you to kill this bloke. And if you don't kill this bloke, I'm going to kill you. So some might look at that and go, maybe Danny DiCarlo was the person that was essentially behind all of this. But for some reason, he turned state's evidence and became the material witness for the prosecution and escaped any drama. Weird that. Anyway, we get sidetracked. So anyway, he turned up at Gary Hinman's house and demands his money back. And the reason that we know that he wasn't planning any violence was because he took Susan Atkins and he took Mary Bruner along with them. And they were friends with Gary. And they just wanted to go and hang out with Gary because they knew that he was going on holiday quite soon. Gary basically says, mate, they're ripping you off. They seriously won't give you the drugs back, but they want their money back. Fuck out of here. Like, come on, mate. Like, they're ripping you off. And he says, they may well be, but they're going to kill me. So what we're going to do? You need to give me some money. And Gary said, no, I ain't got any. They got into a tussle, got into an argument. Bobby lost his temper and shot the gun. This scared them all to shit. And they decided, let's figure it out. So what they did was Gary Hinman says, well, take my Volkswagen. Take that, sell it, give that the money. Jobs are good and everyone's happy. In the interim, Mary Bruner is panicked and she phoned Charlie. Charlie turns up with Bruce Davis, who's a bloke that's been accused of being the Zodiac killer, but almost certainly wasn't. And immediately when Gary answers the door, he smacks him in the face with a sword that had also been given to him by Danny DiCarlo. You can see how this all sort of like it gets very complicated. Gary Hinman's not best plussed about this, and even though Susan Atkins stitches up his face with dental floss, he doesn't feel that this is entirely adequate, and so wants to go to the hospital. They stop him from going to the hospital, and so he gets really shirty and threatens to go to the police. Bobby panics, phones up Charlie, says, "What should I do?" Charlie says, "I don't know. It's your deal. Be a man. Sort it out." Bobby interprets this as kill him, and so he stabs Gary Hinman to death. Like, and this is why, like, that's what happened to Bobby Bosley. Prior to that, he was living with Kenneth Anger, possibly as a sort of live-in lover in exchange for somewhere to live. And he actually was being filmed as Lucifer. There was some sort of like freak off in San Francisco, and Kenneth Anger saw Bobby across the dance floor and literally went, "You," walked up to him and said, "You are Lucifer. I want to make you a star," essentially. And they'd filmed all of these scenes that were supposed to be in Lucifer Rising, but Bobby essentially ran off with all the equipment and all the footage before it was finished, and then got into it with the Hinman and etc. So they never met again. Kenneth Anger claimed that he'd put a curse on Bobby Bosley to turn him into a toad. Bobby Bosley is currently in prison and is not a toad. So how well that curse worked is particularly up for debate. Anyway, footage that was taken that survived of Bobby hanging out with Anton LaVey and smoking a joint, Anton LaVey of the Church of Satan, was later appropriated for a film that came out later called Invocation of My Demon Brother, which Mick Jagger of the Rolling Stones was heavily involved with. But we'll come on to that later. So basically, they asked Jimmy to do the soundtrack because Bobby is indisposed, shall we say. But by 1976, he'd only done about half the tracks, and he wasn't really interested in it, and he fell out with Anger and kicked him out. At which point, Anger stated, "I put the curse of King Midas on them," which was Jimmy Page and his then girlfriend, some lady called Charlotte. "If you're greedy and just amass gold, you'll get an illness. So I did turn her and Jimmy Page into statues of gold because they've both lost their minds and he can't write songs anymore." And people who follow Led Zeppelin, like, there was certainly a drop off after Physical Graffiti. Like, Fucking In Through the Outdoor and Coda are they're not what you call classic albums. However, what Kenneth Anger stubbornly refuses to acknowledge is the genius that was Coverdale and Page. It's the shit. It's the absolute tits. It's not. It's dreadful. Anyway, so Kenneth Anger decided to put this curse on Led Zeppelin, and he did this in 1976. And people attribute these things to the curse. In the early 70s, during the band's US tour, over $200,000 of the band's money was stolen from a hotel safe. There was no signs of forced entry. There was no sort of like signs of damage. Nobody had been seen going in the room. It simply vanished from a locked hotel safe. And so it's never, ever been explained. In August 1975, Robert Plant, the singer of Led Zeppelin, and his wife Maureen were involved in a serious car accident on the Greek island of Rhodes. Plant suffered a severely fractured ankle, and his wife broke a leg and also an ankle. And this forced the cancellation of remaining tour dates for the year and a long recovery period. And this wasn't helped because just 2 weeks later, he was trying to work on his Aston Martin, and it fell on top of him and broke all his ribs. Now, you might have noticed something, that both of those occurred before Kenneth Anger put the curse on, so they're unlikely to be attributed to Kenneth Anger, but could be connected to Boleskine House. So, let's not worry too much about that. In 1977, there was what was called the Oakland incident, and this was a violent backstage brawl that occurred in July 1977 during Led Zeppelin's Day on the Green concert in the Oakland Coliseum in California. And basically, what happened was Peter Grant was the manager of Led Zeppelin, great, enormous, terrifying, hulking man. Used to carry a fucking cricket bat around with him. Have you seen, the chap, the manager has a cricket bat in Spinal Tap?
Oh, right, yeah.
That's based on Peter Grant. That's where they took that from. Yeah, as he says in Spinal Tap, in the topsy-turvy world of rock and roll, having a good, solid piece of wood in your hands can be incredibly useful. So what happened was, basically, his 11-year-old son got a bit roughed up by this chap called Jim Matzorkis, who was a security guard at the venue. John Bonham saw this, and he basically gave the guy a bit of a shoeing, and they thought that was the end to it. But then when Peter Grant, who was, again, a very enormous, very angry, very violent man, also a bit fond of the old Bolivian marching powder, he decided that that wasn't enough. And so him and Richard Cole, who was the tour manager, and a chap called John Bindon, who was a London gangster that they just seemed to have in their entourage because why not? They basically took this guy to a trailer backstage and beat the living shit out of him, like nearly killed him. Apparently the trailer was described as being awash with blood when the beating was over. And this led to all sorts of problems for the band. Also in 1977, there's a band called Eddie and the Hot Rods, and they wrote a song that was partly inspired by Crowley's famous motto, do what thou wilt is the whole of the law. But the band rewrote this as do anything that you want to do. So the band decided that they would acknowledge the reference and put a picture of Crowley on the front cover of the single. But their manager, Ed Hollis, who apparently is the brother of Talk Talk's Mark Hollis, attached a slightly comical pair of Mickey Mouse ears to Aleister Crowley's head. Now, this sort of went across the desk of Jimmy Page. Jimmy Page didn't see the funny side. And so word got to the band that Jimmy Page had actually placed a curse on Eddie and the Hot Rods for their disrespectful treatment of the great beast. And from that moment, the band were plagued with problems. They were dropped by their label. Their manager became hooked on heroin, and they never bothered the high reaches of the chart again. And in interviews, a lot of them have said, well, we don't know, but, after the curse was put on us by Jimmy Page, it certainly didn't do well for us. In 1977, sadly, the son of the 5-year-old son of Robert Plant, Carrick, died suddenly from a sort of bizarre stomach virus at their family home in England. It's bizarre. I mean, it's just one of those horrible things that happen. And then obviously in September of 1980, there was the death of John Bonham. After a day of heavy drinking at Jimmy Page's house, whilst rehearsing for an upcoming tour, John Bonham was put to bed and tragically died from asphyxiation from vomit. His death was officially ruled an accidental death by alcohol poisoning, and this ultimately led to the disbanding of Led Zeppelin. And so people were left wondering, was this the curse of Boleskine House? Was this the curse of Aleister Crowley? Was this brought upon them by the occult experiments of Jimmy Page? Or, was it just a collection of bad things that had happened to a rock band that had been touring the world for a couple of decades? I suppose we'll never know.